The Personal Librarian by Marie Benedict and Victoria Murray. Chapter-by-chapter summary. Chapters 1 and 2, November 28, 1905 to December 7, 1905. In November 1905, 26-year-old Belle D'Acosta Green working as a librarian at Princeton University. She is actually a Black American passing for white, but her birth name is Belle Marion Greener. The president of the university was Woodrow Wilson, while the students were exclusively white males, whereas other Ivy League universities had already begun to break this tradition. The banker and graduate Junius Morgan has donated numerous historical manuscripts to the library. For this, he has been made associate head librarian. He shares with Belle an affinity for the poet Virgil. Junius has arranged for her, today, a private viewing of the library's most valuable treasure, the Virgil collection. While they review these rare works, Junius makes a point to mention his uncle, the infamous financier J.P. Morgan, who is building a new home library in New York City and has recommended Belle for the position of his personal librarian. In no time, Belle is back in New York City where she grew up from 8 onwards, after the family moved from Princeton, and applies for the post of a librarian. Mother Genevieve Fleet Greener and her siblings are seen to be residing in a 2-bedroom brownstone on West 113th Street. The family, before relocating to New York, stayed in Washington, D.C. with her maternal family. She reminisced lovingly of her maternal grandmother. Grandma Fleet was the matriarch of the family. The values that the Fleet family passed on to the kids filled her childhood and rearing, the importance of education and hard work, the need to always be composed. Back in her own home, Belle's mother takes the opportunity to remind her daughter of how she always had hoped that passing as white would result in exactly this type of career development. Belle remembers how her parents argued over this all the time when she was a girl. Their marriage had become increasingly tense with time. When she was 17, her father had left them. Richard Greener was the first black graduate of Harvard and had served as the dean of the Howard University School of Law, while although the mother of Belle came from the well-established Fleet family, her father was descended from slaves. Richard was one of those people that had to travel quite a bit due to his position with the Grant Monument Association. He used to give speeches quite frequently regarding equal rights. However, Richard believed that passing as white was hypocritical to what he was doing, fighting for blacks, and this eventually alienated the other activists from him. Chapters 3 to 5, December 8, 1905 to January 8, 1906. On December 8, the interview with Belle is held at the new beautiful library of J.P. Morgan, whom Junius called with affection Uncle Pierpont. During the interview, J.P. looks at Belle close and personal and asks questions concerning some of the rarest works to measure her qualification. He says she is younger, a female, and less experienced than most of them, to which Belle confidently assures him that she will make his library and collection incomparable. A month later, she reports to the library to begin working at a handsome salary of $75 a month. For the first time, Belle's family begins to live a bit more comfortably. She also expects this position to open doors into the world of high society for her. She is greeted by King, who is J.P. Morgan's business secretary, and she is shown to an office complete with an assistant. Meanwhile, the family back home awaits news of her first day with bated breath excitement at how this new income is going to change their fortunes. But Belle has her apprehensions about the reputedly mercurial temperament of J.P. Morgan. The thought of her father gone these last 8 years, Belle remembered her 10th birthday when he gave her a dog-eared art history book, The Venetian Painters of the Renaissance by Bernard Berenson. He had instilled in her a love both for the arts and for history, much to her mother's dismay. Genevieve scolded him, telling him that Belle should be a schoolteacher, which was a good, dependable job. That evening, Belle begins her study of Latin. It is not a requirement of her position, but she knows that many of the older books that her employer Mr. Morgan wishes to acquire are in languages other than English, and she is determined to learn more languages so that she may better assess those texts. As she works her way through her texts, her mother enters with a letter from her uncle Mozart which contains news about her father, Richard. The letter informs her that Richard is now in Russia and has taken a Japanese woman as a common-law wife. They have 2 children. Chapters 6 to 8, May 24, 1906 to May 29, 1906. By May, Belle's responsibilities at the library have expanded as Mr. Morgan comes to appreciate her work. However, one request she has yet to fulfill is his desire to acquire Thomas Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur, printed by William Caxton. Only 2 copies are rumored to exist, but Belle has been unable to track one down. Mr. Morgan also frequently asks Belle to read to him, often from the Bible or rare books. Mr. Morgan often entertains special visitors at the library, essentially, his female paramours. His unmarried 32-year-old daughter, Anne, is sometimes enlisted to accompany them as a cover. Unlike her father, Anne holds more liberal political views and is cold toward Belle, whom she seems to view with suspicion, wary of any woman capturing so much of her father's attention. Mr. Morgan's other children include Louisa, his favorite, Juliet, both of whom are married, and his son, John Jack Pierpont Jr. Today, Mr. Morgan invites Belle to a ball at the Vanderbilt mansion in 4 days, noting that many dealers, collectors, and experts will be in attendance. A few days later, Belle arrives alone at the lavish Vanderbilt mansion for the event, where guests are dressed in their finest. The Vanderbilts, being newly rich, showcase their wealth through the opulence of their home, which contrasts with Mr. Morgan's luxurious yet understated lifestyle. At the ball, Belle surveys the crowd, meticulously analyzing their mannerisms and social etiquette. The butler's reaction upon discovering that Belle attended the ball alone signals to her that she has committed a social faux pas. Despite her efforts to dress well, Belle feels dowdy compared to the other guests. Nevertheless, she manages to charm those she meets, eager to gain acceptance in this elite crowd. As she passes by a black serving woman, their eyes meet, and the woman recognizes her, offering a knowing smile and nod. Afterward, Mr. Morgan praises Belle for her handling of an art dealer who attempted to sell them a substandard work, and Belle senses a fleeting moment of attraction between them. Back home just after midnight, Teddy is eager to hear all about the party. However, Belle's mother sternly reminds her that she still needs to complete her language lessons for the day, despite Belle's exhaustion from the event. Her mother sits with her as she studies, and even though she doesn't know any Latin, Belle recognizes that her mother's presence is a way of showing her care and support. Chapters 9 and 10, November 4, 1906 to November 5, 1906. The ease and self-assurance that Belle finally attains by November is well-grounded, though the thought of approaching Mr. Morgan is still daunting. Today, they make plans for her to obtain a Bible that once belonged to King Charles I. Belle asks to go to Boston to make the bid herself, and Mr. Morgan allows this. Just now, and enters. When Mr. Morgan moves out of the way, she attacks Belle with a sharp question concerning Belle's parentage, her tropical origins, in fact. And Belle, instead, deftly insinuates rumors about Anne and her 2 lady companions, Miss Elsie de Wolfe and Miss Bessie Marbury. Shunned from the bidding by her male counterparts at the auction, Belle proudly proclaims that she is there to bid on behalf of Mr. Morgan. The bright red scarf adorns her neck as she stands out amidst the rest. When she finally makes that final bid of a crowd-silencing $15,000 for the Bible, she knows she has just made a name for herself and the Pierpont Morgan Library. Chapters 11 and 12, February 9, 1907 to November 2, 1907. By February 1907, Belle has received a raise and an article about her has been published in the New York Times. Today, she and her brother Russell are at the Metropolitan Opera House, enjoying a performance of Aida from Mr. Morgan's box. Since the Vanderbilt party, she has been careful to avoid attending social gatherings alone, often opting to bring her fair-skinned sisters to deflect questions about their ancestry. After the show, Anne's friend Elsie de Wolfe approaches Belle and Russell, inquiring about their heritage. Belle deftly counters her questions by alluding to rumors surrounding Elsie's personal life. In October, as an economic crisis looms, the prices of certain items drop significantly. Mr. Morgan insists they continue their purchasing spree to capitalize on the lower prices. He has been educating Belle on financial matters, explaining that this strategy hinges on the belief that the value of these items will eventually rise again. Soon after, the stock market collapses, triggering bank runs as people frantically attempt to withdraw their money, realizing that their stocks serve as collateral for bank loans. Mr. Morgan shares the troubling news that a friend of his has committed suicide due to financial distress. As the crisis escalates, Mr. Morgan begins lobbying the government for economic stimulus spending. On November 2nd, he organizes a meeting with influential financial men, bankers and trust executives to devise a solution to the crisis. During the discussions, Mr. Morgan asks Belle if she plays bridge, and she inadvertently mentions seeing grandmother Fleet playing, which confuses him since he believes Belle's grandmother is in Portugal. Eventually, the men express confidence that they have found a solution. In a moment of celebration, Belle senses a spark of attraction and longing between herself and Mr. Morgan. However, he quickly dampens the moment by telling her that his romances often end badly, and he doesn't want to jeopardize their relationship, so he takes no action. Chapter 13, March 20, 1908. On March 20, 1908, Belle travels to Washington, D.C. with her family for the funeral of Grandma Fleet, who passed away 2 days prior. They sit in a noticeably poorer quality black train car, as their mother has decided that while in D.C. they will live as black people. During the journey, Ethel asks why they haven't visited D.C. in so long. Belle explains that after their father left, they could no longer afford the trip. While that is true, the deeper reason is their mother's choice to distance them from her black family as part of their decision to pass as white. As her siblings express their anger toward their father and their lack of memories of him, Belle feels a pang of sadness. She cherishes many fond memories of him. Upon arriving at the Fleet house, tension hangs in the air between their mother and her relatives. Aunt Minerva makes a pointed remark about the Green family passing as white in New York and criticizes Belle's mother for not allowing Uncle Mozart to visit. Belle's mother defends herself, asserting that she is doing what is best for her 5 children as a single mother. Aunt Adelaide eventually diffuses the situation by reminding them that Grandma Fleet would not have wanted them to fight. A few days later, Belle is relieved to see that, despite the initial tension, her mother and her siblings have begun to get along. In a private conversation, Uncle Mozart informs Belle that he has heard from her father, Richard, who is back in the United States. He cautions her to be careful in New York, warning that if Mr. Morgan discovers her true heritage, the consequences could be severe, given the visibility of her current status. Chapters 14, May 2, 1908. In May, Belle goes to an exhibition by photographer and gallerist Edward Steichen, who introduces her to his partner, Alfred Stieglitz. They discuss artists of their day, like Rodin and Matisse, and then later on, Mr. Stieglitz gives Belle a photograph of a Rodin sculpture. The very next morning, however, a newspaper shows up with a rumor that contemporary art may find its way into the Pierpont Library, and Mr. Morgan is furious. She quickly appeases him by assuring him that this will never deviate from their attention to traditional works. Chapters 15 to 17, December 2, 1908 to December 22, 1908. In December, Belle embarks on a trip to London for an auction featuring a significant collection of Caxton's and other works, bringing her mother along as her chaperone. As they unpack Belle's dresses, she explains to her mother that she will never truly fit in with her male peers, so she chooses to embrace her femininity instead. Her mother questions the wisdom of being so bold and inviting scrutiny, but Belle argues that no one would suspect someone passing as white would seek that kind of attention. In London, both Belle and her mother feel a sense of freedom, as slavery has been outlawed in the UK for some time, and segregation is less formalized. Belle soon meets with Lord Amherst, the owner of the auction items, and offers a preemptive bid on the Caxton works, suggesting that she may not attend the auction otherwise. While waiting for his response, she mingles with various collectors and dealers around the city. At the last moment, Lord Amherst accepts her offer, and Belle returns to New York triumphant. Back in the States, Mr. Morgan is thrilled with Belle's success. Their celebration is interrupted by the arrival of Bernard Berenson, the Italian art expert who authored the art history book that Belle's father gave her as a child, along with his wife. Mr. Morgan privately mentions that it is rumored Berenson is Jewish, alluding to an underlying anti-Semitic sentiment. The Berensons reside in Italy, and Mr. Berenson's patron is Isabella Stewart Gardner, who has been building her own impressive art collection in Boston. When Belle meets him, She shares her fond memory of reading his book as a child. Later that month, Belle attends a striking red-themed party hosted by Joseph Duveen and his wife, where everything is adorned in shades of red. Although she occasionally senses the scrutiny of others, Belle feels more confident and less concerned about whispers regarding her heritage. While chatting with Mrs. Huntington, reputedly the richest woman in New York, she spots Mr. Berenson and his wife. When he approaches to speak with her, Belle feels a spark of flirtation in their conversation. As they discuss her role as Mr. Morgan's personal librarian, she senses that he truly understands her aspirations for the collection. By the end of the night, Belle is eager to learn more about him. Chapters 18 and 19, March 24, 1909 to March 26, 1909. In March, Mr. Morgan asks Belle to accompany Rachel Costello, the stepdaughter of Mr. Berenson, to the opera, hoping she can gather insights about Isabella Stewart Gardner's upcoming art acquisitions. Belle is thrilled by the opportunity, as her curiosity about Mr. Berenson has only intensified over the past 3 months. At the Met, they attend a performance of Illinois Barbier di Siviglia. While Rachel knows little about her father's business dealings, she reveals that Mr. and Mrs. Berenson are in an open relationship. Belle reflects on her own family's heritage, which makes traditional marriage unlikely for her, and considers that Mr. Berenson's situation could allow her to explore a relationship without the expectation of commitment. Later, Belle encounters Bernard again in the Met's inner sanctum, where they meet with Mr. Johnson for a private viewing of a statue. Bernard corrects Mr. Johnson on the statue's dating and provenance, prompting a protest from Johnson. Belle quickly comes to Bernard's defense. Afterward, Bernard reveals that he will be leaving for Italy in 3 days, but he invites Belle to dinner before his departure. They end up at his hotel suite, where the atmosphere becomes charged. However, as things start to heat up, Belle halts their progress, and Bernard promises to prove his devotion to her before they move any further. Chapter 20, April 1909 to August 1909. As Belle becomes increasingly flamboyant and flirtatious in her social life, she finds herself invited to any and all parties. Her outrageous remarks amuse the crowd, yet she starts to feel like some sort of freak, taken out for sport. She starts to drink just a bit too much, which concerns her mom. Wanting to cool things down a notch, Belle arranges for the lease of a summer lake house for 2 months for her family. At the lake house, Belle gets in touch with 2 of her school-time friends, Katrina, now an officer with the Woman Suffrage Party of New York, and Evelyn, a portrait artist. They tell Belle that many women look up to her for what she has achieved, though Belle argues that she herself is inspired by them and what they do. Later, at home, Belle reads the letters written by Bernard and reflects on their relationship and the feelings they instigate. Chapters 21 to 23, June 2, 1910 to August 14, 1910. By June 1910, Belle begins to feel stifled by Mr. Morgan's growing dependence on her. This shift started when he insisted she attend his son Jack's birthday celebration, a departure from their previous arrangement where she was not expected at family events. It marks the beginning of many such occasions where he requires her presence. Today, Belle pitches an idea for a trip to London and Italy to acquire a rare manuscript and other items. However, Mr. Morgan, suspecting her true intentions, asks her to promise that she isn't just looking for an excuse to see Bernard Berenson, her actual goal. Belle reassures him that her focus will remain on the Pierpont Library. In August, Belle arrives in London by ship, accompanied by Marie, a woman she hired to act as her chaperone. However, their real plan is for Marie to visit Switzerland, allowing Belle some much-needed privacy. Bernard greets her at the docks, and they embrace. Over the next few days, they meet with various art dealers and collectors. On the 3rd day, Bernard informs Belle that his wife, Mary, will be joining them for lunch because she wants to meet her. Belle feels a wave of discomfort during the casual lunch, acutely aware of the dynamics at play. Later, they meet with Mr. Taylor, where Belle makes a preemptive bid on an item soon to go to auction. Knowing the item is incorrectly attributed to the wrong painter, she uses this information to secure the acquisition without needing to go through the auction process. A few days later, Belle and Bernard travel to Italy. In Verona, Bernard is spotted by Jacques Seligman, an art dealer familiar with both of them. To avoid being seen, Belle makes a quick exit. Back at the hotel, she and Bernard finally consummate their relationship. Afterward, Bernard whispers something in Russian, prompting Belle to wonder about his true identity and whether he might be a Russian Jewish immigrant. Chapters 24 to 27, September 23, 1910 to October 26, 1910. Weeks later, as Belle writes an update for Mr. Morgan, Bernard's jealousy flares over her closeness to her employer. Belle reassures him that while she is loyal to Mr. Morgan, it is Bernard who holds her heart. Soon, Belle discovers she is pregnant and realizes she must reveal her true circumstances to Bernard if she wants to keep the child. When she shares the news the following day, Bernard reacts coldly, stating he doesn't want children and implies she should take care of her condition. Although Belle wishes to keep the baby, she grapples with the harsh realities she faces as an unmarried black mother, aware that her options are painfully limited. Initially, she attempts to terminate the pregnancy, but it fails. Soon after, Ethel Harrison, a friend of Bernard's, accompanies her back to London for an abortion. After 2 feverish days, likely due to the pill, Belle wakes up, consumed by sorrow over her decision. Ethel informs her that Bernard will not be returning to London to see her. A few weeks later, heartbroken over not having seen Bernard since leaving Italy, Belle boards a ship back to the States. On board, she encounters Anne Morgan, who is traveling with Bessie Marbury, one of Anne's romantic partners and a prominent literary agent known for representing figures like George Bernard Shaw and Oscar Wilde. During their conversation, Bessie and Anne mention that they recently saw Bernard, who talked about showing Belle parts of Italy, and then warns Belle that she now knows one of her secrets. Chapter 28, December 14, 1910. Since her trip to Europe, Bernard has continued to write to Belle, making it difficult for her to move on. A few months later, Belle attends the opening of the Century Theatre in New York, where she finds herself intoxicated. Her companion, Giulio Gattaca-Sozza, the director of the Met, suggests she should end the night, but Belle insists on going home with him. He declines, sending her back alone. In her drunken state, Belle makes a remark about her dark blood, but Giulio brushes it off as nonsense. Upon returning to her apartment, Belle's mother scolds her for coming home drunk at 2 a.m. and questions what happened during her time in Europe, noting her reckless behavior. When Belle dismisses her concerns, her mother begins to recount a story from her past involving Belle's father, Richard. She recalls how Richard had recently become a professor at a newly integrated university after the Civil Rights Act was passed. Initially, things went smoothly, but the hostility from white students became evident, prompting Richard to advocate for equality more fiercely. Belle is surprised to learn that her mother had actively participated in that fight rather than merely wanting to pass for white. Her mother reveals that during that time, she had given birth to their first child, Horace, who was frail and sadly passed away. However, with the shift in government as Democrats took over, the gains made during Reconstruction were undone. The university reverted to a whites-only institution, and both Richard and Genevieve faced harassment as they left campus. This experience propelled Richard into a lifelong commitment to civil rights, while Genevieve felt that passing as white was the only means of survival. Listening to her mother's story, Belle begins to understand the mentality that drove her mother to abandon a life she cherished in favor of passing. This realization strengthens Belle's resolve to honor the opportunities available to her now. Chapters 29 and 30, April 20, 1911. Since her conversation with her mother, Belle has become more cautious. Today, Mr. Morgan has tasked her with managing the simultaneous visits of 3 of his 4 mistresses, with Lady Johnston being the only one she truly respects. This year, Belle has purchased 2 adjoining apartments near the library, a larger one for her family and a smaller one for herself. Tonight marks the auction for the William Caxton edition of Thomas Mallory's La Morte d'Arthur, a prized item Mr. Morgan has coveted since she began working for him. At the auction, a California railroad tycoon, Henry Huntington, bids aggressively, driving prices up on numerous items. When the Caxton comes up for bid at the end, Belle surprises everyone with a staggering bid of $50,000, securing the book. After the auction, reporters swarm Belle, eager to hear about her victory. She emphasizes that the Caxton will remain in New York for scholarly study instead of falling into private hands in California. Later, when she presents the Caxton to Mr. Morgan, he is thrilled and mentions that publications across America are eager to feature her story. She reflects on a recent letter from Uncle Mozart, which mentioned that her father is living alone in Chicago, and she imagines him reading about her achievements. In a moment of celebration, Belle and Mr. Morgan share a kiss. However, when he questions whether it's a wise decision, Belle instinctively says no, reminded of his many fleeting relationships. After he departs, she finds herself questioning if turning him down was the right choice. Chapter 31, January 14, 1913. By the year 1913, Belle's relationship with Mr. Morgan has changed considerably. He has become clingy and jealous with her growing profile that brings speculation about her love life. He often peppers her with personal questions about what she has done and what she will be doing in the future. If anything, when he told her that if she got married, the relationship was over. Belle interprets this as a threat with financial and emotional overtones. His assertion that he owns her has her angrily fleeing his office for the first time without dismissal. Chapters 32 and 33, April 1, 1913 to September 8, 1913. On April 1, 1913, Belle is notified of the death of Mr. Morgan on March 31, 1913, because of illness during a journey in Cairo. His body is laid to rest at the Pierpont Morgan Library. Following the burial ceremony, Jack insists on riding with Belle and assures her that they will do everything within their power to keep his father's memory alive. After Mr. Morgan's death, Jack is left in charge of the library. Belle finds he sees it more as a thing akin to a collection of goods and chattels rather than as a breathing, living repository of art that his father did. Shortly after this, Jack tells Belle that Mr. Morgan has left the library to him in his will and has stipulated that he should employ her for at least a year. He says that he would have, anyway. Jack also says that Mr. Morgan has left her with a bequest of $50,000, enough to make her and her family comfortable for life. Chapters 34 and 35, November 20, 1913 to December 4, 1913. Still grappling with her grief, Belle seeks solace in reading, delving into the work of her father and the writings of civil rights leaders. She contemplates how, as a black woman passing as white, she might contribute to these important causes. One evening, while dining with her friend Katrina and other women, the conversation shifts to women's rights. Belle reflects on how she has neglected issues of race and gender. During the dinner, Katrina's friend Jonathan approaches with a book by W.E.B. Du Bois and discusses its ideas. Later, Belle goes home with Jonathan and shares an intimate moment with him, but she ultimately pulls away before it escalates. In that moment, she realizes that what she truly needs is to discover who she wants to become. In December, Belle travels to Chicago to find her father. Their reunion is warm, and they express regret over the time lost in each other's lives. She confides in him about her personal crisis, feeling uncertain about her future now that financial concerns are no longer pressing. He asks whether she believes her work holds meaning, to which she responds affirmatively but questions if she should embrace her identity as a black woman rather than continue passing as white. He notes that, for now, it seems impossible for her to maintain both her job and live authentically as a black person. He advises her to continue on her current path, recognizing her remarkable achievement in establishing herself as an important librarian and art historian. Chapters 38 and 39, October 2, 1916 to December 10, 1916. By October 1916, Belle arrives in England, where the war has led to an influx of rare books for sale. She meets with Jack, who discusses potential acquisitions and the sale of Mr. Morgan's Fragonard paintings. However, when Belle suggests traveling to Paris next, Jack firmly forbids it, citing the risks of wartime travel across Europe. 6 weeks later, still in London, Belle meets with Joseph and Henry Duveen, two brothers who may act as brokers for the Fragonard sale. To her dismay, They mention another sale of Mr. Morgan's assets, information Belle has shared with no one but Bernard. The Duveen brothers propose a cut of the profits if she agrees to use them as brokers, but Belle recognizes that profiting in such a way would be unethical. They also reveal that they have dealt with Bernard Berenson in the past, making Belle realize that Bernard has betrayed her for their benefit. Deeply hurt, she declines their offer and later weeps, grappling with the reality of who Bernard truly is. On December 10th, as Belle prepares to leave London, she reflects on her professional triumphs but feels sadness over Bernard, to whom she has sent a parting letter. Just before her departure, Bernard arrives to apologize, but Belle rejects his pleas, expressing her anger at his selfishness and lack of care for her. Chapters 40 and 41, June 4, 1922 to June 26, 1922. Belle's father passes away from a cerebral hemorrhage on May 2, 1922, but she doesn't learn of his death until after the funeral. A month later, she visits his grave at Cedar Hill Cemetery, passing by Mr. Morgan's resting place along the way. As she contemplates the legacy she wishes to leave and reflects on her father's words about living a meaningful life, Belle realizes that she must persuade Jack to transform the library into a public institution to make a positive impact in the world. Understanding Jack's traditional values, it occurs to her that framing the decision as a way to honor his family legacy might sway him. A few weeks later, Belle approaches Jack and asks how he plans to pay tribute to his father, reminding him that Mr. Morgan once erected a statue in honor of his own dad. She points out that Mr. Morgan's will stated the library should be permanently available for the instruction and pleasure of the American people, suggesting that this implies making it publicly accessible. Chapter 42, March 28, 1924. In the year 1924, racial hatred against black people grows in the United States that has resulted in lynchings and massacres of the black community in different areas. In March of 1924, Belle agrees to an interview with Samuel Beckett of the New York Times about the library and her place in it. As she gives him a tour of the facility, they discuss its new status as a public institution and such a much-valued cultural gift it indeed is. When Beckett inquires about rumors of a romantic relationship between Belle and Mr. Morgan, she playfully replies, "Suffice it to say that we tried." Epilogue, January 14, 1948. On January 14, 1948, Belle burns lots of records and old letters to protect her ancestry and safeguard her legacy. Yet, she can't help but wonder if someday someone will uncover the truth, that Belle de Costa Green, the personal librarian to J.P. Morgan, was a black woman.